slideshow. So anybody, we want to welcome everybody to our symposium here, and basically wanted to start cursor here by introducing our faculty. I'll be serving as the moderator for our session. We have Drs. Miller and Fletcher on the panel. Both of them are PGY3s who are in the process or just applied for Dermpath Fellowship. John is with the LSU program in New Orleans, and Morgan is with the UT program in San Antonio. Eddie Rodriguez is a PGY4 who applied last year and will be starting a fellowship the next academic year at New York Medical Center. And then we have two Dermpath fellows, Dr. DeCrescenzo and Dr. Enos, both of whom are doing a Dermpath fellowship in Texas. Drew is at UTMB in Galveston, and Tyler is doing his Dermpath fellowship in Houston. And rounding out our panel, we have Dr. Martin Fernandez, who's the director of dermatopathology at Scott and White, Baylor Scott and White in Temple, and is also the program director for the dermatopathology fellowship there. Dr. Vickers is a derm-trained dermatopathologist who practices clinical derm and reads Dermpath. Dr. Yalamanchili and Dr. Martin are both full-time dermatopathologists with SAGES in Houston, and Dr. Martin actually serves as the laboratory director. So you can see we've got kind of a good mix here for the faculty, and we should have people here who can answer almost every question that you would have. I also want to offer a special thanks, a shout out to our support team. April McDonald is helping run the meeting. She's our Director of Resident Education. And for those of you who've tuned into our happy hours, I'm sure you've had communications with April or seen her name on emails. Ida El Torre is Director of Development and Communications and does a lot of work in putting together our YouTube videos, as does Cindy D'Artes, who's the Director of Marketing and Events. So a lot of behind the scenes work, and really wanted to thank them. So before we get started, I just wanted to give you an overview of how the seminar is going to run. As soon as I get done with the introductions, I'm going to turn the floor over to Drs. Fletcher, Miller, and Rodriguez. They're going to talk about the application process, which is a little unique to dermatopathology fellowship applications because it's not standardized. Then I'll probably have Eddie and Drew and Tyler comment on some of the factors they considered in choosing a program. Then we'll move on to Dr. Fernandez, who will hopefully give us some words of advice from the perspective of a program director. I know, Martin, people would be interested in kind of what factors a program director considers when looking at a CV and how people can prepare for that process. We'll have Drew and Tyler then talk about their respective Dermpath programs and give us an idea of what their day-to-day work schedule's like. And then I'm going to have the remainder of the panelists just briefly introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their training, their career path, and we'll open it up to questions. I'd like the session to be extremely interactive. And so I would encourage you, we'll keep the chat function open. As the moderator, I'll be watching the chat function. April will be watching with me as well. And we'll field the questions as they arise. For those of you who think of questions after the fact or maybe watching a video recording of this seminar, please feel free to submit questions at any time to education@sagesdx.com, or you can email me directly, tdavis@sagesdx.com. I've also put my cell number down here. Feel free to give me a call or a text if that's easier for you. So without any further hesitation, I'll go ahead and stop my share, and we'll turn the floor over to Morgan.
All right, thank you, Dr. Davis. I will try and share my screen too. So if I could be made into a little co-host to share it, I'll pull up my slides as well. Beautiful.
Okay, you're ready to go.
Okay. All right. Should be pulling up now. Okay, so I am also going to talk with John and Eddie, and please jump in at any point, interrupt me. I'll pause after every slide, but we're going to kind of briefly discuss the fellowship application process. So Dr. Davis has already kindly introduced us. I'll kind of glide over this slide, but here we are. So we're going to start with just talking kind of generally about the timeline. And this is, like I said, a general overview of the timeline. This is not specific, but starting in your PGY 2 year around that July, so end of your PGY 1 year, jumping into your PGY 2 year, start brainstorming, or July of your PGY 1 year, beginning all the way to the end of the PGY or start of the PGY 2 year. Start brainstorming, thinking about if you're interested in dermatopathology, find some research projects and get that hands-on experience if you can. When you are a PGY 2, very early on in your experience, prepare your application, research your programs. That's going to be kind of the background work that you'll start with. As soon as the June starts in your PGY, end of the PGY 1 year, really your applications are opening. So send them off as soon as you can. Programs do start to open around June 1. Some may be a little bit later in the timeline, but I would be prepared to off the applications around June 1. July, some programs do stop accepting applications at the end of July. So by that, PGY 3, beginning of your year, so that'd be your second year in derm residency or path residency. That's when you need to definitely have them concluded and sent off for sure. By the August, November timeline, the interviews are already being offered and performed. And then let me see if I can see this a little bit better. The interviews will start being offered in October. All right, so based on the breakdown of the application, just as an overview of general programs, are going to be asking for an application form. That can either be the ASDP or the CAP application form. Some may have personalized application forms and that you can download mostly from their website, or someone will email you a version. Do need to have 3 letters of recommendation prepared, an updated CV, a personal statement, usually just 1 headshot, but some programs may ask for 2. And then the others are mostly optional and seem to be sort of program dependent, but may need to have a dean's letter prepared, medical school transcript, a diploma, step records, and then some may ask for just an example of your writing in the form mostly of scholarly activity, such as a case report. Some applications do actually have an online platform to be sent through, whereas most others will just ask you to email those documents from yourself mostly, and then the letters of recommendation typically will come from your program director. John or Eddie, if you want to jump in at any point, just stop me.
Yeah, no, that all sounds great. Just would like to emphasize that you apply and maybe even accept a position about 2 years before you're actually going to start. So it's different than most other fellowships, especially for dermatology. So keep that in mind.
Absolutely. That's
and
great.
like Dan was saying, yeah, like it's not standardized. So like different programs have like their own deadlines. Like I have some programs that are open like starting 2 years in advance. There are some that are like 18 months, 12 months. Like it's kind of all over the place, but I mean, you shouldn't wait for like, you want to get as many programs in as you can, hopefully. So start thinking early.
Absolutely. So how do you find out which programs are available? The ASDP does have a website. That's the link here, and it's just a screenshot of the website that you would see. This would be for our application cycle. And it provides you a list of programs on this actual website that is not extensive. So it actually refers you to the ACGME website to do further research. So I'll show you where you'd go. You'd go next to the ACGME, and this would be how you would enter the website. You would put in there, as you can see in sort of the bottom left-hand screen, dermatopathology. Of course, you click view report and it will show you a list of programs. This is just a screenshot of the first 3 programs that pop up on the list. For our year, there were 58 programs that were found, but of note, that's not all the programs that were available. Many of those were already, slots were already provided and taken. So that's why you do need to do some additional research. So emails and phone numbers, not up to date on this website. You definitely have to look out on their own websites, reach out to the proper, typically program coordinator, and find out which contacts you need to be using. And then, like I said, some programs just were not available. So that's why another email can be beneficial. and then do your own research in the background. If y'all have anything to comment on that, that's just my experience that I've found too. And then narrow down your list. So, you have to narrow down the programs that are not available, go down to the only available programs. In our year, it was around like 25 that were available that were not filled. And then, you can wean them down based on your preferences, pros and cons based on your programs. And we'll talk about things to look for in a program next. Then send out your application. So ideally very early, like we said, all these programs have different timelines. So starting somewhere around June or July, and this would be jumping into your PGY3 or end of PGY2, that's when you really need to be sending out those applications. And then interviews, so you're typically informed via email. Sometimes they will give you a phone call as well. And typically there are not a variety of dates. It's usually one date, but there may be two, and it can be short notice. Sometimes it's around 2 weeks. Sometimes it's, hi, we're interviewing you tomorrow. Currently, they've all been virtual interviews. So on Zoom or Teams, those platforms are being used. And then you interview typically with the current fellow or fellows, and most or all of the dermatopathology faculty, whoever seems to be available for those interviews. And they may last between 2 to 5 hours, but that's just rough. It can be on multiple days. It can be in one day, and it can be a full day. It can be a shortened portion of the day. And then offers, I'm just going to briefly touch on this and I'll pass it over to John and Eddie, but this is on the ASDP website. Technically, the programs that have stated they will follow this timeline, it does state that October 1st is typically where the offers are going to be extended. Typically, the interviewers are provided 24 hours to accept or decline. Now, this is a big caveat. Programs may fill early. They may offer positions during your interview, may offer outside the ASDP timeline. Not all the programs have decided to follow this timeline. And then we've already briefly touched this, but once you accept a position, you're not starting the following year. It's usually 18 months in advance, or could be even earlier or later. And John and Eddie, y'all can comment further on this.
Sure. So that's kind of like the tricky part. Like a lot of times, since, as we mentioned, it's not a standardized process. I mean, you might get a call from a program, even if you still have interviews like lined up or something, and they'll offer this to you, and you have a limited amount of time to decide. So just think a lot if this is a program you'll feel comfortable with, especially because there's nothing else guaranteed after that. Like, you don't know if you're going to get more interview offers or even a position offer anywhere else. So in a lot of ways, I feel like it's kind of like first come, first serve, like at least for a lot of people, unless people have very specific requirements of where exactly they want to end up. But it's tricky, it's one of the advantages is that you get to hear a lot early from programs. Like, I interviewed, and 2 days later, they extended a position offer for me. So that's kind of nice. You don't have to wait like the match, but at the same time, you don't have to wait for the match. So you can maybe wanted to hear from other programs, and that's not going to happen, at least a lot of times. So just be aware of that.
Yep, I would second what Eddie said. There's pros and there's cons to it. It's definitely a flawed system, but it's the one that we have to work with. Separate point that I wanted to talk about was how time-consuming the application process can be, since so many programs do have a unique application, and they're probably asking for the same types of information, like your step score, and for you to enter your research publications, or even just where you went to college and where you went to medical school and the address or the names of your letter writers. And it quickly soaks up a lot of time. You can spend an hour on a PDF editor filling out their unique application. And if you apply broadly, like I did, I think I applied to 30 programs. So I probably spent 30 hours or, 20, 25 hours filling out applications. So it's lucky whenever they take the ASDP or the CAP standardized application. But again, probably half don't.
Yeah, kind of going along the same lines. What I did, and I don't know if you kind of did it differently, John, but I know like me and Morgan had talked about it, and kind of how I did it is as you're researching these programs, I kept like an Excel sheet with like, I kind of took the ACGME list, I put it into Excel document, and I was just going down the line, like, these are the requirements. Is it a regular application, like an ASVP application, or is it like a special application that I need to work on? And I need to like schedule more time for that. And then I also had boxes of like when their deadline is. Some of them publish it, some of them don't. Hopefully you'll be lucky, if you find like a bunch of programs that do. Some of them were kind of mixed, or the website was not updated. And then I also had boxes for like, have I submitted my application, or did I email the coordinator to ask something and I'm still waiting to hear back? And then pretty much like I will ask for confirmation after I send my application. I will send an email like, hey, like, is everything okay? The application complete. And if they confirm, then I will fill out another box saying like, it's been confirmed, it's been received, it's complete. And then I'll just kind of wait to hear back. Kind of help keep things organized, at least.
Right. And maybe reach out to the coordinator and confirm that there's an open position before you fill out a unique application. Because a lot of times, it's been 45 minutes filling one out, send it in, and I'd get an automatic reply that we're no longer accepting applications for 2023, 2024. So consider that.
Great. Thanks so much. Appreciate it, guys. And then, John, that's not even having to stay on the people you asked to write letters of recommendations for. I mean, because they get lost in the shuffle, So anyway, once you get the, I think you're muted, John. Once you get the application done, you're not done.
Right. And one more piece of advice: if your letter of recommendation is coming from someone that's not at a academic institution, it may get lost in the spam folder. So for instance, Dr. Davis was nice enough to write me a letter, but oftentimes programs would reach out to me saying, we never got Dr. Davis's letter. And sure enough, it would be in their spam folder.
Great, good. Well, would you guys like to comment, those of you who have gone through the interview process and are either in fellowship or doing fellowship, some of the factors that you considered when making your choice? Eddie?
Sure, I can start. Kind of got to do some thinking about it, and I kind of made a somewhat short list, but I feel like it's important to consider all these things. Like, number one thing I thought about is like kind of location. Is this somewhere that you will possibly like to practice? I mean, it might be even helpful. Like if this is like an area that you'd like to practice and you get a program in there, you get the advantage that you get to know a lot of the people in the area. You might get some like job offers locally. So location is pretty important. Do you have any like family close by? Some people like to be close to family. So I would say location is something to consider for sure. Like anything else, I mean, like same thing with medical school, same thing with residency. Cost of living kind of goes along with location. Do you have children? Do you have a spouse? Are you willing to get roommates? Things like that, because different places have wildly varying prices. Like if you're in like the the East Coast, the West Coast, kind of like anywhere in between, it's going to vary a lot. Is this something that you feel comfortable with? Is this, if you're having a spouse, like do they have a job, like, or is there somewhere that they will feel comfortable as well? I have a wife, I have a kid. So it's something that, we did consult and be like, hey, is this something that we're okay with, and luckily it ended up working out. But it's something that's really important, especially if you possibly want to end up in that area. Other things that I looked into, and I actually, when I had my Excel sheet with all the programs, I actually had a section for notes of anything like kind of worthwhile to mention of the program. And something to look at is the Dermpath SurgPath split. Some programs are pretty half, for a lot of them are half for the most part. There are some of them where you get a lot of SurgPath and maybe a little bit less of Dermpath. There are some that, you may get a little bit more Dermpath, but for the most part for Dermpath, from what I saw, it's average of like, 6 months. Some of them maybe have a little bit more like 8. Some days have maybe not necessarily dedicated Dermpath months, but they're kind of like half and half. So like morning you will do SurgPath, afternoon you will do Dermpath to kind of have some continuity throughout. So that's something to think about. especially because I think you want to get as much Dermpath as you can, because that's primarily what you're going to be reading. Along with that same lines, the amount of cases and diversity you're expecting to see, like, is this a program that, reads a lot of cases? Is it like, are you going to be reading like, few cases and you're not going to get a lot of experience? Because with Dermpath, really, it's, you have to read a lot to kind of get good at it. So you want to have a good amount of cases that you're going to be responsible for. Is this like a surgical center? You're going to primarily be reading, a lot of like neoplasms, or you're going to have like a good diversity? Is it a program that receives a lot of outside, slides, maybe from the community? So you want to get as much diversity as you can. You want to get a good number of cases in, and then does the program provide any additional benefits? Like I kind of made notes on some programs, like, hey, this program provides, housing assistance. This program provides, stipends for like academic, they give you books for, that you're going to need, or some programs have like, a meal plan, things like that. So considering all those extra perks, it's worthwhile. And then finally, what I kind of settled on as I was thinking through this is kind of your gut feeling in a way, like, is this a program that you feel like you will be comfortable at? This is a program that you feel that you're going to be able to, work in and kind of develop as a dermatopathologist. These are all kind of things that I figured like they will be fairly important to think, at least in your mind, or at least make some notes here and there. Don't just look at, this is the one program and I applied that, it's in a good area and like, let's go, So this are all.
Yeah, I would add to that too. And Eddie and I talked about this. I think, you want to take some time or have the opportunity to speak to the current and or some of the past Dermpath fellows as well. Because, if they're not happy, or if for some reason the program is kind of not letting you talk to them, to me, that's kind of a red flag too, But anyway, okay, well, thanks. Anybody else have anything to add? If not, Martine, we'll turn it over to you, and would certainly welcome any advice that you have.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you very much, Dr. Davis, for inviting me to participate. And let me try to share my screen as well.
April,
yeah, I think I'm not.
Are you getting a blocked message?
Yes, let me see.
I just made you a co-host, Dr. Fernandez.
Oh, perfect. Let's see. One second. Sorry. Sure. Can you see my screen?
Yep, we sure can.
Okay, great. Sorry for the delay there. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I agree with, I think Morgan, Eddie, and John did a great job in summarizing the application process. And maybe I'd just like to make a couple of points to reiterate what they have said. And every year at the ASDP meeting, the program directors get together and discuss a number of things. And one of the things that we have discussed is trying to come up with a common timeline to make the application process more easy for everyone, for applicants and for programs. So a couple of years ago, we came up with this timeline, and I think this is the second year that we've tried to do it, and it pretty much reflects what Morgan had said earlier. The programs that agreed to participate with this timeline accept applications from June to September, and then typically conduct interviews from August to November. and start offering positions on October the 1st. And so there's a couple of caveats to this. Like, of course, to begin with, not all programs participate or agree to participate in this common timeline. But even among the ones that participate, some programs may choose to push forward these dates. And then the other thing is that you know, the whole process can get pushed forward in some programs and still be considered you know, compliant. The key thing is for programs not to offer a position before the October the 1st, so that, you know, applicants can have a chance to choose a program if they have several offers. And the other caveat is that you know, some programs can have an internal candidate, and they may offer that position before October 1st and still be considered compliant. So those are the two main caveats. These are the list of programs that are that have agreed to follow that common timeline. As you can see, these are only 25 programs, and yeah, like Morgan mentioned, at the moment there's 58 programs that are have full accreditation from ACGME. So of course, you know, you should really look at the ACGME website to have a complete list or a comprehensive list of all the programs that are accredited. And another thing that we have discussed is the possibility of using a match for Dermpath, and these discussions are still ongoing. As you can imagine, many program directors are in favor of using a match, while others would prefer just to continue with the current system. Yeah, in my opinion, I think it would be a good idea to have a match, in the sense that, like in the past, one of the drawbacks of having the match is that really applicants would be in a position that they had to interview at more places, right? They would have to travel more. But now that most of the interviews are being conducted through, you know, virtually, then I think that it's much more doable. But we'll see. Who knows? And of course, even if a match, even if we start participating in a match, not all programs are required, you know, to participate in the match. So just the ones that want to participate will be, you know, that's the way it's going to be. So it's not going to be required. And let's see. Yeah, I have some more thoughts about things to consider, and I think that Eddie touched upon. Oh well, actually, before mentioning that, I'd like to just mention a few things. For anyone who is considering doing a Dermpath fellowship, I think it would be a good idea to join the American Society of Dermpath, and if possible, to attend the annual meeting of the ASDP. You may be familiar with, but in that meeting we have a meet the program director session. That is very, you know, it's a fun session. And essentially what happens is that there's about 20 tables, and in each table there's 2 program directors. And so many of the applicants or people that are interested in pursuing a fellowship join the session, and then they stay about 5 minutes per table. So during those 5 minutes, you know, program directors have the opportunity to meet many potential applicants, and same thing, the applicants meet the program directors. And I think it's very productive. Actually, our current fellow here at Baylor Scott & White, her name is Kate Cordy, and she trained at the Cleveland Clinic. And I happened to be sitting in the same table as Dr. Bergfeld. So she introduced me to Kate, and so I was lucky to be there, because, you know, she came to interview, and so she just started her fellowship. She's doing a great job. So I was lucky to be in that program director session. So I would recommend you to participate if possible. Also, you may think about volunteering at one of the ASDP committees. You know, there's maybe not enough positions for everyone, but you may be able to get a spot in one of the committees, and that's a good idea. And also you may think about joining the International Society of Dermatopathology, and this host joint meetings a couple of days before the AAD meeting. So that's also, both of these societies have a lot of resources that you can, you can take advantage of. And finally, I think, if possible, it's a good idea to think about, doing an elective rotation, especially if you're particularly interested in one program. I think many program directors would agree that it would help, to get to know better the candidate. But I understand that this is not possible at all programs. So, but that's something to think about. And finally, this is what I was mentioning earlier, is that I think Eddie did a great job in summarizing what are some of the important things to look for in a program. And from my point of view as a program director, I think fit is probably the most important factor. And he was mentioning about the gut feeling, and that's exactly right. I think if you have a sense that the program has a good learning environment, that's very important. If you think that you'll be happy at the program and get along with the faculty and trainees, maybe if you're interested in an academic career, it might be better for you to consider one of the bigger programs that are more productive academically. So all these are important in relate to fit. And finally, location, with relation to fit, location is also important. Would you be happy living in the particular location? However, I think that out of this, maybe if I can suggest, this 1 year of your life, so you might consider being a little flexible in terms of location, but I mean, still, I wouldn't apply to some place that you wouldn't be happy living, even if it's for a year. But what else? And then the other thing, of course, is volume and diversity of clinical material is really very, very important, because that's what you'll be spending a lot of time previewing cases, so that's super important. Another thing is workflow. Not all programs function the same in terms of workflow. Some, I would recommend that you pay particular attention to, do you have the opportunity to preview cases on your own and enter your own diagnosis? And if so, how much time do you have to preview those cases? That's very important. And also the experience in either in general pathology or in clinical dermatology, depending on your background. For example, for dermatology trainees, what is the rotation in general pathology like? And for pathology trainees, vice versa, right? What's the rotation in clinical dermatology like? So yeah, that's all I have. I don't know if there are any questions. I'm happy to answer.
I don't think we have any yet. The questions that I had gotten in advance, Martin, you already kind of addressed, and one of the main was strengthening your CV, and how do you make yourself a more viable candidate. And I think you answered that very well. And I think I would imagine from a program director's perspective, if you see somebody who's got curiosity and has actually taken the time to look at the field and ask the tough questions, then that obviously becomes much more attractive as well. So great, thank you. I think now we'll go ahead and turn the floor over to, I'm not too sure whether Tyler's been able to make it yet, but if not, Drew, if you're on, we can turn the floor over to you, and you can kind of tell us what your day-to-day life has been like since you started your fellowship.
Hey, thanks, Dr. Davis. My name's Drew, the Dermpath Fellow. I was Derm trained. I'm the Dermpath Fellow at UTMB. And I'm really enjoying the fellowship so far. It's been great. The day-to-day workflow is pretty much the same throughout the entire year. There's no like block schedule for ours. And I'll tell you how it kind of flips for the derm and the path trained fellows. But for me as the derm trained fellow, we sign out with Dr. Sanchez in his private lab that's affiliated with UTMB. It's on the island just a few blocks away. And he comes and we sign out cases from the previous day. So we've had a whole day to look, at up to, 100, 150 cases per fellow. And of course, after holiday weekends, the volume kind of trails off, that kind of thing. But we have a whole day to look at all those cases. My co-fellow Chuck, we on the hard ones, pass it over to him. Chuck, what do you think? He passed something over to me. What do you think on this melanocytic? So there's some camaraderie building there. And then in the late morning, kind of towards the lunch hour, the derm trained fellow will break off. Or when you're done with sign out, you'll go over to the surge path guys, and they'll pull cases that are kind of relevant to your education and training. A lot of head and neck stuff, heme path, that kind of stuff. And then there's noon lectures that you attend if relevant to you as a dermatopathologist, the heme path, head and neck lectures and stuff by the surge path faculty. And then in the afternoon, you sign out with Dr. Kelly, Dr. Wilson, and Dr. Goodwin, who are the faculty at UTMB, and you're doing the university hospital cases, which, is more of your academic type sign out, more increased complexity of cases per se, that kind of thing. So it's a good hybrid of both. It's really fellow first here. And the path trained fellow will go into various clinics. We have the Texas Department of Criminal Justice Derm Clinic. They see all sorts of very diverse ranges of pathology, late presentations of a lot of different things. And so you get, I think the requirement is 1,000 patients throughout your fellow year, and the path trained fellow meets that in just like a couple months, and then you have the option to, kind of keep that going and get that clinical experience and see a lot of patients and skin that you might otherwise not get. I feel like I've spoken long enough, so I will pass the torch.
Okay, I'm not too sure. April, do you know whether Tyler was able to meet us at all?
No, I don't think he was able to join us.
Okay. Well, we got a good feel for you or from you, Andrew. One question that was fielded to me, and I don't know whether you'd be in a position to answer it, was from one of the individuals who couldn't attend. His question was, is there one thing you wish you had known prior to starting your fellowship year? Anything take you by surprise, or?
I guess I got lucky in that I really like the fellowship, and I guess it would be important to know maybe the full responsibilities that you do. Say you go in eyes wide open, how much scut work or busy work, non-physician work are you going to end up doing? That is a hard question to ask any program when you're in the position of being an interviewee. So that kind of goes into networking with the prior fellows, exactly like you've mentioned, people who've been there, done that. And just kind of get, just the full day-to-day rundown and are you happy with it? I feel very fortunate and lucky to be attending a UTMB. The volume of cases and range of pathology has just been spectacular. And I've just been very lucky in that there hasn't been any negatives. And I'm not being paid to say that. Yeah.
Well, it's still early in the year. No.
Yeah. perhaps for at least derm trained, maybe fully elucidating maybe your experience with surgical pathology would be very beneficial. And depending on how much dermpath and kind of co-exposure to the remainder of pathology that you had in your residency might key into, you know, the education that you're desiring in a fellowship. I, for example, came from a very dermpath heavy residency. We had a lot compared to most. And so I came in pretty strong on the dermpath front. So I was kind of looking forward to budding out and, like, you know, focusing a little more on the heme path and that kind of thing. And that might be totally different for a derm person from a different program. So
Sure.
that's yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, so maybe having an idea of kind of the mix of cases that you're going to get exposed to, you know, as well. So great, appreciate that. Okay, well, I think if we can get the rest of the panelists to go ahead and turn their cameras on, I'm going to go ahead and let everybody introduce themselves. I'll get us started off. My training initially was in dermatology. And after I finished my dermatology residency, I had a military commitment. So I practiced clinical derm for a year prior to doing fellowship training at NYU. After I did that year, I came back and had a 4-year commitment to the military. And I was on the faculty for the military residency training program in dermatology. In that capacity, I probably did about, I would say, 70 to 80% clinical derm and about 20 to 30% dermpath. So it was definitely weighted heavy on clinical medicine. At that time, I started moonlighting for the guy who I ultimately went into practice with. And when I left the military, for about 6 months, I helped staff a resident clinic. I wanted to kind of do a mixture of derm and dermpath, but the environment was different. Than the dermatologists who were supporting our dermpath practice said that if I started seeing clinic, they were not going to send specimens to the lab anymore because we were competing with them. And 20 years later, it was the first practice to insource dermpath. So anyway, the climate was a little bit different, but very quickly was able to see enough dermpath that I did exclusively dermpath, and I've been doing that ever since. But I've also been doing some active teaching as well. So that's been kind of my journey. Trey, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. I path trained, and I actually didn't decide until later in my path residency to do dermpath. So I was kind of a year behind the ball. Ended up getting accepted with Bernie at the Ackerman Academy. But I had a year to blow because I had nothing to do, because it was 18 months later that I was going to be entering. So I actually practiced general surg path for a year at Baylor in Dallas. And what's interesting is I kind of, you know, you can get very creative in your career, and they actually sponsored me on my Dermpath fellowship in New York. So I got paid both my fellowship pay, and they paid me a stipend, a pretty sizable stipend, and gave me benefits and everything. And so I owed that group of general surgical pathologists a year. And I went back and after my fellowship in New York and practiced with them for a year. But it was fascinating because they put all those resources into me, but then they didn't feel that that they necessarily had to give me all the skins of the practice. So very quickly, after about 6 months of this, and they were all still signing out their own skins, and they wouldn't give them to me because they just didn't feel it was necessary. I called Bernie and said, "Can you put the word out that I'm looking for a job?" And he said, "No, I won't do that." And I was like, "Oh, I knew he hated me." But he said, "You're coming home." So I went back to New York and I practiced up there for 5 or 6 years. And, you know, it was a great time because I met Raj at that time, who's sitting there. I've met so many contacts up there with all the fellows that were coming through. At any one time, there were 20 people sitting at that scope. And that kind of launched my career because one of those fellows actually founded Sages, and then we kept in touch. And when the Ackerman Academy got bought, that's the other thing. You're gonna enter practices and whatnot, and there's lots of buying and selling, and the corporate world took over the Quest took over the Ackerman Academy, and I left, and Jeff left, and Bernie had died, and it was just time to move on, and ended up partnering with Keegan Lee, who I'd met up there, and that's how Sages kind of was born, along with John Cangelosi, and then Raj joined us almost immediately, I think within a year after that, and it's been we haven't looked back since. So
Great. Well, thanks.
yeah.
Appreciate it. And you probably, I would say, one of the questions that came up that was submitted ahead of time, Trey, and we can both answer it, you from a path perspective and me from a derm perspective, was what happens if you get the gap year? So what happens if, let's say, you don't get picked up for fellowship right away, or you find yourself applying a little late in the game? What do you do? What is the advice? And I can tell you what, that year of doing clinical derm for me after residency and before doing fellowship was golden. I wouldn't trade that for anything in the world.
Well, the same experience with me. So me joining a very hardcore general surge path gave me a strong foundation in the traditionally non-Dermpath portions of Dermpath, like lymphomas and some of the more esoteric tumors. So everyone brings something different to a practice, and you need to develop your strengths. And there's a reason we all practice together, and that we're all not opening our own labs by ourselves. And that's because everyone brings something different to the table, and it's those experiences turn those negatives into positives, like I did, and I think Tom did too. And if you have a gap, don't waste it. Go out, get a job, make contacts, find, never just sit there, because you're losing time in contacts, essentially. And that's very important. You're losing time, experience in contacts, I should say. And all that is going to build to make you the ultimate dermatopathologist,
Exactly. Well, thanks. Jennifer, you've had a different experience than us, so.
So my name is Jennifer Vickers, and I appreciate being asked to be on this panel. I always enjoy doing these things with Dr. Davis. So I trained in residency in dermatology in New York City. I was with New York Medical College, so mostly at Metropolitan Hospital and in the Bronx. And then I decided to go for a Dermpath fellowship, and I ended up with Dermpath Diagnostics in Einstein College of Medicine under Dr. Jacobson, which is kind of a sister program to the Ackerman Academy. And so I was lucky to have a lot of exposure both within my fellowship and also working with other fellowship programs in the area. When you train in New York, as Trey was saying, you're around lots of residents and fellows and a huge medical community, and it's really nice to learn from that. So I did my fellowship there. I wanted to come back to Austin, where I went to college and my family is here. And so that was the plan. And I ended up going to a wedding where I saw one of my friends who's a dermpath, and he told me about an opening at Dell Medical School here, and they were looking for a dermatologist, and he was asking for help with kind of overseeing the dermpath curriculum and taking on some of the lectures. And to me, that sounded perfect. I never sought out to teach, but I was always that resident who had the med student in their room and was yapping at them and telling them all the things, and not leaving them alone because I wanted to teach them everything. So it seemed natural just to go into a position doing teaching. So they said when I went into the position that I might be able to practice some Dermpath, but it wasn't a guarantee. But honestly, I was going to get to teach it. I was going to keep up my skills. I was happy to do that. I did that for a couple of years. And then about halfway through my time in academics, I met Dr. Lee, and he's here in Austin also. So even though Sages is in Houston, he has a little office here in Austin where he reads. And we met at one of the resident functions, and we kind of started talking, and we decided that it might be fun for me to come in and do a little bit of Dermpath with Sages, keep my skills up. offer some things to the residents as well, because as you guys know, Sages is very interested in resident education. So we kind of formed a little partnership in that way. And I started doing that in about 2016. So I joined Sages in 2016, did a little bit of reading, definitely took advantage of having good mentorship in the Sages pathologists. And I ended up leaving academics after about 4 years, went into private practice, which is what I'm doing now. And I'm really fortunate in that I can do half clinic and half Dermpath, and I read mostly for my practice. So it's a fairly large practice. We have locations in Louisiana, here in Austin, San Antonio, Houston. And so I get to read with dermatology. I get to read 4 dermatologists that I work with side by side, which is really nice. So I have a pretty sweet deal, and I'm very lucky that I found my way here. So really love working with Sages and love doing a little bit of clinic at the same time.
That is great. Jennifer, I would ask, again, as I alluded to earlier, if somebody is, just coming out of fellowship and considering that they want to do that type of setup, how would you instruct them, at least getting out and starting? Again, I think the one danger is putting too much on your plate at one time. Would you agree with that? And so
Yes.
would you suggest starting out slow?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. I think sometimes one of the challenges when you're doing kind of both jobs, and it's a kind of a hybrid situation, is that one side will forget that the other one exists. And so you're sort of always having to balance the two. And so oftentimes, I'll be asked to see more patients or add more onto my clinical schedule. And I think it's easy for the people that I work with to forget that when I'm not in clinic, I am actually working and I'm doing path. And so, as most of us are, we have good work ethic and we want to be a team player. And so you'll agree to things, and then sometimes it can start to get to be a lot. So you're right, Dr. Davis, definitely, taking it slow, getting your feet wet, kind of feeling out what you're capable of, how fast you're able to read slides, how well you're able to see patients, how well you're able to stay on time in clinic so that you can do your path afterwards. So yes, taking it very slowly is very important.
Yeah, I what I've tried to do throughout my career too is yearly make an assessment. And sometimes, if you commit to doing that once a year, periodically you need to hit the reset button and kind of pull back. Or sometimes you're in a season where you can add more, but you have to remind yourself you're not locked into necessarily anything. So, because otherwise you're going to get resentful.
Now, see, I'm learning from this panel as well, because I've got to listen to you, Dr. Davis, and do the things that you suggest.
Raj?
Thanks, Tom.
Raj has done a little bit of everything.
Yeah, I have a little bit more of a circuitous route to how I got to where I am now. So I am also dermatology trained, like Tom and Jennifer. And I did my training up in New York as well, like Jennifer. I was at downstate, so in Brooklyn, and we went to Queens and Long Island as well for our clinical training. So I should preface this by saying, yes, I'm a full-time dermatopathologist now, but the irony of that is that histology was my least favorite class in medical school. I did terribly in it, and I told myself, if I never need to look at a slide again, that would be the greatest thing in the world. And when I landed in a derm residency, I genuinely had very little idea that we would have to do some path as part of a derm residency. And I thought that was really, really worrisome. The irony, though, is that despite having started there, I had the benefit of an amazing mentor when I was a resident, Dr. Ed Heilman, who is both path trained, derm trained, and a dermatopathologist. And he's worked closely with Trey too. But he just completely opened my eyes to just a facet of dermatology that I just never thought I was going to ever like, let alone love. And about halfway, at the very beginning of my second year of residency, I talked to Ed and was like, look, Ed, I never thought that I was going to want to do this, but I really, really love Dermpath. And he made me work for it. I mean, he really put the onus on me to convince him that this is something I really wanted to do, and for all the right reasons. And our program happened to be affiliated with the Acumen Academy and the fellowship there. And so it was kind of a very seamless transition for me as I applied and then ended up there. And during my fellowship year, which I have to say was probably my favorite year of just medical training in my life for so many different reasons. It was kind of the culmination of a lot of the things that I loved and just the people I got to work with, the mentors that I had as a fellow. I got to work with Trey, who was one of my mentors, and with Jeff Gottlieb, with Bernie for half of the year of my fellowship, and still got to work with Ed Hammond. So all in all, it was a really great experience. So I want to echo with what some of the residents had mentioned earlier in this panel discussion of, it's really so important to like the place that you're going to be spending a year at. And it's not just because it's the 1 year you're going to be spending there. The relationships that you build in that year, the connections that you make. We're in a pretty small community, whether you're a derm-trained dermpath, path-trained dermpath, doesn't matter. There are not that many dermatopathologists out in the world, and it's a relatively small community. It's really nice when you make these contacts and these connections. And if you would have told me then that I'd be working in a lab alongside Trey every day and with Keegan, who did the same fellowship the year after me, and now one of my former co-fellows, Danielle, she's joined us here at Sages. I mean, it's really, really nice to be around people who you have this history with and that you've learned from and alongside. So anyway, so after I finished my Dermpath fellowship, I still had to stay in New York for a year for family reasons. And in a sense, I had a gap year after my fellowship because I wasn't quite sure where I was going to land. So I was moonlighting with one of my derm attendings during my fellowship, and I just worked full-time as a clinical dermatologist in his very large group. It was a group of, I think, about 12 dermatologists. It was a large group, a lot of medical derm, a lot of cosmetic derm, and I worked a ton that year, which was a great experience because I really, really got to entrench myself in clinical dermatology. I was bummed that I wasn't able to do path. There wasn't really an opportunity, and I knew at that point that I was going to be moving to Texas already. So it was kind of a filler year in a sense. And then as I was moving to Houston, I was looking for dermpath opportunities in Houston. There were some in Dallas, but not in Houston, which is where I needed to be for family reasons. And so this was where I kind of think my path maybe diverged a little bit. I didn't really have a dermpath option. And so I opened my own clinical derm practice. I was just in solo practice, and I ran my own practice for about 6 years. And all the ins and outs of running your own business, running your own practice, seeing my own patients and building that up. And about 2 years into it or so, Keegan, who I'd stayed in touch with since fellowship, he mentioned that, I'm coming down to Houston, and my friend John and I were starting this lab, and we should meet up when I come down there. Would you consider sending to us? And so my relationship with Sages actually started because I was sending my specimens, the biopsies I was doing in my clinic, I was sending to Sages, and that kind of evolved into Keegan talked to me about, hey, do you miss Dermpath? You haven't done it. It's been like a couple of years since your fellowship, or at that point, maybe it's been 3 years. Would you ever want to do it again? I was like, I wish there had been an opportunity. I do miss it. I mean, that's really what I thought I'd be doing. And so that kind of started with, I was just kind of unofficially going to the lab and just kind of, looking through some cases and just kind of refreshing my eyes and getting used to it again. And then once I decided this is what I really wanted to do, I spent a lot of time with Trey looking over cases and previewing cases again. And there was just kind of a natural transition point in my practice to where a neighboring practice was interested in merging with mine or practicing with me anyway. And so I just used that as an opportunity where I sold my practice to them and just dove into doing Dermpath full time here at Sages, and I've been here ever since. So in a way, it was a little bit more of a circuitous route, but I'm very happy about the route that I took because I think all the years of clinical derm that I got to do on my own were incredibly valuable. Definitely made me a really good dermatologist, and I love dermatology and all the practice of clinical dermatology. But I do feel like that helped me a lot as a practicing dermatopathologist at this point too. So kind of the opposite of what Jennifer was saying, where it's the importance of keeping up your path skills while you're doing a lot of clinical derm. For me, I feel like sometimes it's the opposite, where I'm trying to still keep up with the clinical aspects of it since I do Dermpath full time, But the nice thing about that is, I still read journal articles and of course go to meetings. I'm still on a bunch of group chats with a lot of my former co-residents who I'm still really good friends with, who all present interesting cases. They ask me path questions, and then just every day getting to talk to the clinicians that we read for. I mean, there's so many different clinicians and clients that we read for, and I really enjoy that part of the day, getting to talk to them, because when you're working through a case together, it reminds me too of, oh, hey, did you try this? Or I remember seeing a case like this once, and they keep me up to speed on a lot of things too. So that camaraderie and that kind of collaborative effort, I think, regardless of if your background is derm or path, once you're doing Dermpath, I think that's one of the really cool things about what we get to do is, kind of develop those relationships with the clients that we read for. So yeah, that's kind of how I got to where I am now.
That's great. Well, it sounds like you would be, Raj, in agreement with Trey and I, in that, if people find themselves, kind of not taking a linear path, that's great. I mean, that's fine, so
And I think to echo what Trey said earlier, I mean, if you do have these years where you're kind of, or a year or 6 months or however long, where you're trying to figure out what your next step is, whether it's just trying to even get into a fellowship or post-fellowship or whatever it might be, make the most of that time. I mean, you can still get plenty of experience doing something that you were trained to do, whether it's a search path job or a path job or just a clinical derm job. Someone always needs a derm to fill in somewhere in a clinic, whether it's locums or whatever it might be. So make the most of that time, because that will just make you better at what you're going to do ultimately down the road anyway.
I will add too, if I remember correctly, Raj, parenthetically, part of your circuitous journey was through Austin.
Yeah, actually, that's right.
So Jennifer, this is getting very
I know, we are all very connected. That's right. I did my internship at Austin, and I rotated through what is now Dell Children's. Back then it was, I think it was just, I don't even know what it was called back then. It was part of the Seton Healthcare Network. But yeah, and I remember thinking during my internship, God, Austin is so amazing. Can you imagine if they had a derm residency here? Who wouldn't want to come here? And of course that didn't exist then, but I'm very happy that it does now. It's great for them. And they're very lucky to have Dr. Vickers, so.
Great, good. Well, I don't think we have any other questions. I will ask, do any of the other residents, Eddie, John, Morgan, do you guys have any questions for the panelists as budding dermatopathologists?
No, that was a lot of great information. You answered all of my questions. Appreciate your time.
Great, good, wonderful.
Yeah, I really appreciate everything. Definitely insightful to hear from all the different panelists. So thank you for that. But yeah, I think it answered a lot of the questions I had.
Great. Well, I sure want to thank everybody. And, this will be, I'm sure, one of our frequently watched videos. Thanks so much. Hope everybody has a great evening.
Thank you.
Everyone, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.